The sun energy is getting a little stronger every day, and so I can imagine that this winter run is going to be winding down soon enough. Not very soon, there's still lots of ice and snow, but my thoughts are starting to move towards trying to finalize some of the compost that's finishing on the north end, keep that organized, and try to think about what the last flow patterns will be as we enter into, or we leave winter and move towards spring. So this will be a video where I talk a little bit about what that looks like, but I'm also going to integrate a fair bit of long form chicken TV within that for those of you that like that. And I've got 50% battery on my old phone here, so I'll just do this until it runs out. As things thaw out and warm up a little bit, the energy of these chickens really changes quite a bit. When it's very, very snowy and there's no sun and it's very cold, they tend to stay in the coop for a while, and now they're just blasting out ready to go. So my first work is to dump a little bit of soaked grain for them. They've got a fair bit of nice material in here. We'll take a look at that in a moment, but let me get some grain down. There's a bucket from yesterday that we can just polish off, give them that easy stuff. This one's pretty soupy, but that's okay. There's a lot of dry leaves in here right now. I don't want to get a ton of excess moisture, but since it's a covered space, we don't have to worry about heavy rains or snow saturating. And I think I'm looking forward to getting some fresh grain, some rye and stuff. These seeds are old enough, they don't really germinate very well anymore. So the sunflower has germinated beautifully, but the wheat, the rye, the barley, it'd be nice to freshen up that seed this spring, get some new stuff so that we get better germination. I want to revisit doing the sea of green outside as I've done in the past. It worked really nicely. I'll do a little bit of turning here in a moment, but I want to talk for a moment first at the idea of partitioning this clearly not finished, very high warmth, high nutrient loaded compost from this far end where you can see the transition. So this is material that is close enough to being finished that with a little bit of sifting as needed for seed starting flats, but pretty much we can just load this into crates or wheelbarrows and move it out to the garden when things thaw. So I'd like to make a cleaner break between what this material is and what this material is. And I think milk crates are going to do some nice work to that end, so I'll grab a few and bring them in. But I realize our friends here would probably prefer that I turn some compost first, so I'm going to stop and do that. The compost from our home, they get all their shells back. Here they're getting some bananas and some meat. And I'd love to get some compost moving for them too. The material down in here, even though it's towards the beginning of the run, when I get lower, the quality of it looks beautiful. So there's a lot of material that's going to not take too long to finish up. Lots of worms, lots of sprouts. And maybe that's enough for right now. Yes, the material down low has had red wigglers running through it for a while, undisturbed. And so I think a lot of this is actually worm castings, which is beautiful to have. Good, a gentle warmth to it, not a ton of steam. This stuff over here is going to be a little bit piping hot, but still pretty functional. Someone commented in one of the last videos that, like, you know, if I'm always just skimming the surface, if that's all we ever do is just skim the surface, then down below it can become anaerobic and get kind of nasty. And I think that's true. So these deep, deep digs piling up, so they almost get down to grade or original ground line. Like for us, it's clay, so we can really feel it. Digging down to that and allowing that air all the way through, super helpful. And now that it's getting a little less intensely cold, we can afford to let the compost cool off a bit. But now I want to make these divisions over here. I've spoken before about how milk crates can be helpful in a chicken composting system. We use them for sorting material. It's a really nice, great size for like a coarse sifted material. You can fill it up halfway and shake it over a seedling flat. So they're useful there. I don't like to use these in direct contact with really hot compost. Just my suspicion is the hotter the material, the more it might leach plastic. I don't want that to be happening. But in the cool of the winter, up against compost that is on its way towards finishing it's warm but not hot. It's a very useful way to delineate between the old or the aging, finishing, finalizing compost and the raw stuff. So I'll grab a few more and start laying them in. The crates don't need to be right next to each other. A little bit of space between them lets more aeration happen, and that's fine. Now I just need to fill them up with some material, and so that they don't get kicked over. Since they're going to be separating out the unfinished that could really feed worms for a while from the finishing, I'll put in the unfinished material so it becomes a really nice attractive spot for worms. I need to grab a few more that go over here, maybe 3 or 4, and then fill them up so they're weighted. And it's as simple as that to create kind of this boundary between the really active space and the finishing space. Really simple, and I don't care if they kick a little between the two, it's not a big deal. But now as they flatten out the top of this, it goes up against the crates, and they flatten out the piles we'll make on this side, it goes up against the crates. They can walk between them, as you see. A little bit of blending in that area, but a nice differentiation. The main thing is I don't want this big pile to be kicked all the way apart where it comes back into the unfinished. Talked before about using wooden dividers, which are a little bit more natural, less questionable as far as what they might leach. So it's understandable if people would want to prefer that. The reason I'm definitively not using it right now, these are them. These are 4-foot lengths of locust. But this is seized up from the fall. This is outside here. And until things thaw, I don't really have access to these dividers. And they're not very tall, so it's helpful out here where we have really wide, flat areas for the summer and not so much peaked areas for the winter. At some point I'll do an update on our firewood shed / solar power system, but on the west end here is where I cache these useful, ugly but really functional things. We've got the bulb crates that we've been collecting for years, and that's great for storing crops and drying things, doing air prune boxes, minor air prune boxes, and then lots and lots of milk crates. We've got them all over. We've made relationships with produce managers and managers of local supermarkets that we can buy these for a few dollars a piece and get that's the offset of their deposit. And then some chains, I've talked with managers and they just give these to us for free. So milk crates could be pretty useful, maybe for free where you are. That's all there is to that. Now I can get to the fun work of making some fresh piles. I'm going to start with this far end. I'm going to move that plastic that's been there to kind of cover the compost when it's been particularly cold, but I'll just move that out of the way and make a nice big pile and know that the hens can safely kick it apart without losing that differentiation. That just offers an immense amount of interaction time for the hens. You can see there are not tons of sprouts left in there, but there are a few. That's it. I don't think I'm going to dig into this again. Maybe we'll add to it, but this will be what we harvest for our first round of seed starting and for potting up nursery stock for local sales this spring. We'll mix with a lot of wood chips on the bottom and a little bit of perlite in there for fluffiness or for porosity. This can get a little bit waterlogged because it's pure, straight organic matter. They can work on this as much as they want. If we get another cold snap, we can put plastic on top. And just for reference, the peak of this is 10 feet high, and I can't stand there anymore. It's probably up about 5 feet. And then the sides are 8 feet high, and I'm crouched in order to fit in there. So even though it doesn't look like a lot, it's actually a significant amount of material, especially when you think of it as this has been all waste material. It's leaf bags, it's wood chips, it's food scraps from restaurants that are getting tossed. and it's old seed that are feeding the hens, and it's their manure and compost, and it's red wigglers. So this is the byproduct of feeding hens for nearly nothing for an entire winter. It's pretty phenomenal yield. Permaculture works pretty nice. Now there's a nice moment to integrate two different sections of compost into one to become a little bit more unified and nice. So there's material on the east side, which is hotter, has more red wigglers, more sprouts. There's this material in the middle that's a little bit more leafy, and then the west side, which is very, very leafy. And so we're going to braid those two lines together into a nice pile right in front of these milk crates here. And that'll be the rest of my work for the morning right now. That should be enough for the hens to have something to do for the rest of the day. And I'm going to quit talking. It's now just one long video of what it looks like to do that. They've got some soaked seed, they've got some veggie scraps. At some point we'll come through with a sharp nursery spade and slice these kohlrabi up a little so that the worms can start eating them, and then the chickens can eat the worms. The leaves they'll just eat directly. And then there's tons of sprouts, tons of worms hidden all throughout this. This is a good enough pile for about, I don't know, between 20 and 50 hens to have a full day activity and their food needs met. And I just looked at that last video shot. It took me 3 minutes to do that. So, 15 minutes a day, probably for up to 100 hens, you can feed them in the winter on almost entirely waste material, maybe $1 a day worth of soaked whole seed if you can get it in bulk. Very economical, especially when we're seeing what eggs are costing now. I think that's only going to continue. You can raise hens and have incredibly healthy eggs almost entirely on waste stream in the winter in a cold climate. You can definitely do it in the summer in a warm climate. If you made it this far in the video, thanks for watching. Hope you are doing well where you are, and we'll see you again soon.